It was very nice. That's the exact phrase I whispered to myself the first time I lied to my husband without feeling guilty afterward. I still remember the moment clearly. It was raining outside, one of those slow, depressing evenings where the entire apartment feels gray no matter how many lights are on. My husband, Daniel, sat in the living room playing some game with his headset on, barely noticing I had spent almost 2 hours getting ready. New dress. Perfume. Hair curled. Nothing. Not even a glance. At first, I told myself marriage just becomes like that after a while. Less excitement. Less attention. Less everything. But deep down, I think I stopped feeling like a woman long before I stopped feeling like a wife. That night, I posted a random photo on Instagram. Nothing revealing. Just me standing near the bathroom mirror in an oversized sweater. 3 minutes later, someone replied to my story. Daniel is insane for not worshiping you. It was Ethan. One of Daniel's old friends. I hadn't talked to him in years. I should have ignored it. Instead, I reacted with a laughing emoji. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was continuing the conversation. Ethan was different from Daniel in every possible way. Confident. Sharp. The type of man who looked directly into your eyes when you spoke, like every word mattered. Even through text, I could feel it. By midnight, we were talking about relationships. By 1 a.m., we were talking about regrets. By 2 a.m., I was telling him things I hadn't told my own husband in years. And the worst part? It felt easy. Dangerously easy. The next morning, Daniel kissed my forehead before work and thanked me for washing his gym clothes. That was it. No, you look beautiful. No, how are you? No, I miss you. Just gym clothes. Meanwhile, Ethan had sent. I couldn't stop thinking about you after last night. I stared at that message for 10 straight minutes. I knew exactly what was happening. I knew where this kind of attention leads. But after feeling invisible for so long, being wanted again felt addictive. For the next 2 weeks, Ethan became part of my daily routine. Good morning texts. Voice messages. Late-night conversations while Daniel slept beside me. Sometimes I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling while Ethan told me things no married woman should enjoy hearing from another man. You settled too early. You deserve passion. You sound unhappy. The scary thing was, he wasn't wrong. One Friday night, Daniel canceled our dinner plans because his friends invited him to watch a fight downtown. I acted supportive. The second he left, Ethan texted me. Come get a drink with me. I should have said no. Instead, I spent 40 minutes picking an outfit. The bar was dim, loud, warm. Ethan stood near the back wearing a black jacket, and the moment he saw me, his expression changed completely. Like he'd been waiting for me. Not casually. Not politely. Hungrily. And for the first time in years, I felt beautiful. We talked for hours. Real conversations. Not bills, groceries, or whose turn it was to clean the kitchen. When he touched my hand during a joke, I didn't pull away. When he leaned closer, I didn't move back. And when he quietly said, "You have no idea what you do to me," I forgot I was somebody's wife for a few seconds. That's the part nobody tells you about betrayal. It doesn't usually start with sex. It starts with attention. With feeling seen. With hearing exactly what your starving heart needed at exactly the wrong time. Around midnight, Ethan walked me to my car. Rain covered the windows. The parking lot was nearly empty. And then he kissed me. Just once. Soft. Slow. Careful. But it completely destroyed the line I promised myself I'd never cross. I drove home shaking. Not from guilt. From adrenaline. Daniel was asleep on the couch when I got back. The TV was still on. One hand inside a bag of chips. I stood there staring at him, mascara slightly smeared, lips still warm from another man's mouth. And that's when my phone lit up again. It was very nice seeing what your lips taste like. I froze. The message glowed against the dark living room while my husband slept less than 10 feet away from me. That should have been the moment I blocked Ethan. Deleted everything. Confessed maybe. Instead, I read the text 3 more times. Then smiled. I hated myself for that smile. But I still smiled. Over the next few days, something inside me changed. I became hyper-aware of everything Daniel didn't do anymore. How he barely looked up from his phone during dinner. How conversations became instructions instead of connection. How he touched me automatically, like habit instead of desire. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed everything. If I changed my hair, he noticed. If my mood shifted slightly, he noticed. If I disappeared for an hour, he asked if I was okay. That kind of attention becomes dangerous fast. Especially when you're lonely inside your own marriage. 3 nights later, Daniel fell asleep early again. I stayed in the bathroom pretending to do skincare while secretly texting Ethan. "You're making this harder," I wrote. "Good," he replied instantly. I stared at the screen. "You should feel guilty." "I do." "Then why are you still talking to me?" The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. "Because I think you want someone to stop pretending you're just a wife." That line hit harder than it should have. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time after that. I didn't even fully recognize the woman staring back anymore. Not because I was cheating, but because part of me didn't want to stop. The next weekend, Daniel announced he'd be out of town overnight with coworkers for some work event. I remember my stomach tightening the second he said it. Not from sadness. Anticipation. That realization alone should have terrified me. Instead, I texted Ethan before Daniel even finished packing. "Tomorrow night." His reply came seconds later. "Tell me where." The entire next day felt unreal. I cleaned the apartment like a nervous teenager preparing for prom. Changed outfits 6 times. Tried convincing myself I still had control over the situation. I didn't. Not anymore. At 8:13 p.m., Ethan knocked on the door. I opened it almost immediately, which made him smirk. "That eager, huh? You talk too much," I muttered. But I was already smiling. He walked inside slowly, looking around like he knew crossing that doorway meant something irreversible. The tension between us felt ridiculous. Heavy. Electric. For a few minutes, we just talked in the kitchen while I poured wine neither of us was really drinking. Then there was silence. The dangerous kind. Ethan stepped closer. "You nervous?" "A little." "You want me to leave?" I should have said yes. Instead, I whispered, "No." That one word changed everything. He touched my waist gently at first, like he was giving me one final chance to stop him. I didn't stop him. When he kissed me this time, it wasn't soft like before. It was months of tension crashing at once. Need. Frustration. Curiosity. I grabbed his shirt before I even realized what I was doing. And somewhere in the middle of kissing another man in my own kitchen, I had the horrifying realization that I wasn't thinking about my husband at all. Not even a little. Ethan pulled back slightly, breathing hard. "You have any idea how long I've wanted this?" I laughed nervously. "You're a terrible person." "Probably." Then he kissed me again. The rest of the night blurred together in fragments. His hands on my hips. My back against the counter. Us trying to stay quiet even though nobody was home. At one point I remember laughing into his shoulder because the entire situation felt insane. Married women aren't supposed to feel like this. They're not supposed to crave chaos. But after years of routine and emotional emptiness, this felt less like betrayal and more like finally waking up. That's what scared me most. Not the cheating, how alive it made me feel. Around midnight, we ended up sitting on the living room floor, exhausted and slightly drunk, talking like we'd known each other forever. And that's when Ethan casually asked the question that changed the entire situation. "So, does Daniel know about Ryan?" The room went completely still. I slowly looked up from my wine glass. "What?" Ethan leaned back against the couch casually, but I noticed the way his expression changed slightly. "Ryan," he repeated. "From a few years ago." I felt my stomach drop. There was no Ryan. Ethan frowned. "You're serious?" "Yes." For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he laughed quietly to himself. "That's interesting." "What is?" Ethan hesitated like he was debating whether to continue. "You really don't know, do you?" The anxiety spreading through my chest suddenly had nothing to do with cheating anymore. "Know what?" He rubbed his jaw slowly before answering. "Daniel used to talk about you constantly back in the day. Like, obsessively. But there was this guy he always mentioned. Ryan from your old office. I blinked. That was literally just a coworker. Apparently Daniel didn't think so. I stared at him confused. He thought you cheated? Ethan gave a small shrug. He never outright said it. But he was convinced something happened. That's insane. Maybe, Ethan said carefully. But honestly, the way he talked about it messed him up for a while. I suddenly felt sick. Not because of Ryan. Because of what that meant. Daniel never trusted me fully. Maybe not even from the beginning. All these years I thought he became emotionally distant because marriage got stale. But what if it started way earlier than that? What if part of him checked out long ago? You're lying, I whispered. I'm not. I stood up and walked toward the kitchen, my head spinning. Pieces started connecting in ways I didn't like. The random jealousy years ago. The weird comments. How Daniel hated when I stayed late at work back then. I always thought he was just insecure. But if he genuinely believed I betrayed him first. Oh my God, I muttered. Ethan followed me slowly. Hey, did everyone know about this? No. But you knew. Because he talked to me. I laughed bitterly. Wow. That's ironic. What is? He confided in you about being scared I'd cheat on him. I looked directly at Ethan. And now I actually am. Neither of us spoke after that. The silence felt heavier now. Ugly. Complicated. For the first time since this started, guilt hit me properly. Not exciting guilt. Not adrenaline. Real guilt. I suddenly pictured Daniel years ago, paranoid and insecure while I dismissed his fears as ridiculous. And now here I was. Living proof he was right to worry. I think you should go, I said quietly. Ethan's face tightened slightly. You mean that? I don't know. That's not an answer. I pressed my palms against the kitchen counter. I can't think straight right now. He stepped closer, but didn't touch me this time. You know what I think? I didn't answer. I think you've been emotionally alone for so long that this feels bigger than it actually is. I looked at him carefully. And what is it actually? Ethan held eye contact for a few seconds before replying. Two lonely people making terrible decisions. That should have ended things. Honestly, it almost did. After he left, I sat alone in the apartment until nearly 3 a.m. replaying every mistake that led me there. The flirting. The lies. The excitement. I kept telling myself I needed to stop before this destroyed my marriage completely. Then my phone buzzed. One message. Ethan. Tell me to disappear and I will. I stared at the screen forever. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. This was the moment. The exit. The last clean chance to undo everything before it got worse. Instead, I typed, "Come back for 5 minutes." The 3 dots appeared instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "You're going to ruin me." 10 minutes later, there was another knock at the door. And this time when I opened it, Ethan looked at me differently. Not playful. Not confident. Almost worried. But I still pulled him inside anyway. Because by then, the scariest part wasn't losing my husband. It was realizing I didn't want this feeling to end. Because by then, the scariest part wasn't losing my husband. It was realizing I didn't want this feeling to end. When Ethan walked back into the apartment, neither of us pretended anymore. No jokes. No excuses. No, this is a bad idea. That phase was over. He closed the door quietly behind him, and for a second we just stared at each other in silence. "You called me back," he said softly. "I know. You shouldn't have. I know that too." But even while saying it, I was already walking closer. That's the thing about betrayal nobody prepares you for. Once the line is crossed, it becomes easier every single time afterward. Your brain starts adapting to the guilt, justifying it, reshaping it into something survivable. I kept telling myself this wasn't really about Ethan. It was about feeling alive again. About escaping the version of myself that spent years cooking dinners nobody appreciated and sleeping beside a man who barely noticed when I cried in the bathroom. Maybe that was selfish. Maybe it was pathetic. But it was true. Ethan touched my face carefully, almost hesitant this time. "You can still stop this." I laughed quietly. "You keep saying that like you want me to." His eyes stayed on mine. "I don't. And then he kissed me again. The chemistry between us had become dangerous because it wasn't just physical anymore. We knew too much about each other already. My fears, his regrets, my marriage, his loneliness. That emotional intimacy made every touch feel heavier than it should have. At one point, he pulled back slightly and looked at me with this almost conflicted expression. What? You're not what I expected. I smiled faintly. What did you expect? A bored married woman looking for attention. And instead he paused. Sad. That word hit harder than I wanted it to. Because he was right. Underneath all the excitement, all the sneaking around and adrenaline, I was deeply unhappy. Not just with Daniel. With myself. Somewhere along the way, I became a person I wouldn't have respected a few years earlier. And the worst part? I still couldn't make myself stop. The next morning, Ethan left before sunrise. I watched from the bedroom window as he walked to his car in the cold morning fog, hands in his pockets. The entire apartment smelled faintly like his cologne afterward. I should have cleaned immediately. Instead, I climbed back into bed and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Daniel came home around noon. He kissed me casually when he walked in and started talking about the trip almost immediately. Funny story from work. Hotel complaints. Some drunk coworker embarrassing himself. I nodded at the right moments while silently panicking every time he got physically close to me. Did he notice anything? Could he smell Ethan's cologne? Was I acting differently? But Daniel seemed completely unaware. That somehow made me feel even worse. A few days passed. Then another week. Ethan and I kept talking constantly. Sometimes innocent conversations. Sometimes dangerously flirtatious ones. Sometimes long emotional discussions that felt more intimate than anything I'd shared with my husband in years. I started deleting messages obsessively, turning my phone over whenever Daniel walked near me, taking longer showers just to answer voice notes privately. I became good at lying frighteningly fast. Then one night, everything nearly collapsed. Daniel was sitting beside me on the couch while I scrolled through my phone pretending to watch TV. My heart stopped when a notification appeared at the top of the screen. Ethan. I can still feel your nails on my back. I reacted instantly and locked the phone. Too late. Daniel looked over. What was that? My chest tightened. Nothing. You grabbed your phone kind of fast. I forced out a laugh. Because my mom keeps sending conspiracy videos. Normally, he would have ignored it. But this time he kept staring at me. Longer than usual. And suddenly I saw something in his face I hadn't seen in years. Suspicion. Real suspicion. You okay lately? He asked slowly. Yeah. Why? You've just been different. I looked away immediately. Tired, I guess. Daniel nodded once, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. That night, while he slept beside me, I barely closed my eyes. Because for the first time since this started, I realized getting caught was no longer just a possibility. It was becoming inevitable. After that night on the couch, Daniel started noticing things. Small things at first. Why I smiled at my phone more often. Why I suddenly cared more about how I looked when leaving the house. Why I took my phone everywhere, even to the bathroom. The atmosphere between us changed subtly. Not openly hostile. Just tense. Like we were both pretending not to see something standing directly between us. Meanwhile, Ethan only became bolder. I miss you. I want to see you. You're all I think about lately. Those messages stopped giving me adrenaline and started giving me anxiety. But I still answered every single one. That's what scared me most about the whole situation. Not the lying. The attachment. One Thursday evening, Daniel surprised me by suggesting we go out for dinner together. I almost said no automatically because Ethan and I already planned to meet later that night. That realization hit me like a truck. I was about to reject my own husband to spend time with the man I was cheating on him with. And somehow, even then, part of me still wanted to. Dinner felt painfully awkward. Not because Daniel knew. Because I suddenly noticed how disconnected we'd become. We ran out of things to talk about within 20 minutes. The silence between us wasn't peaceful anymore. It was empty. At one point, Daniel looked at me across the table and quietly asked, "Are you happy?" I genuinely didn't know how to answer. So I lied. "Of course." He nodded slowly, but his expression didn't change. Then he said something that stayed in my head for weeks afterward. "I feel like I lost you a long time ago." That sentence almost broke me, because part of me wanted to scream. "You did." But another part knew I'd stopped trying too. Marriage doesn't collapse in one dramatic moment. Sometimes it dies slowly through neglect. Two people becoming roommates without noticing. That night after dinner, Daniel fell asleep early again. I sat in the kitchen staring at Ethan's contact on my phone for almost 10 minutes before finally texting him. "We shouldn't do this anymore." The reply came immediately. "Do you mean that?" I didn't answer. A minute later. "Look me in the eyes and say it." I hate how weak that made me feel. Because deep down, I knew I probably couldn't. An hour later, I was sitting in Ethan's car outside his apartment building. Rain tapped softly against the windshield while neither of us spoke. "This is getting messy," I whispered. It already was. "I think Daniel suspects something." Ethan leaned back in his seat, jaw tight. "Then stop seeing me." Simple answer. Reasonable answer. So why did it hurt hearing it? I looked at him carefully. "Do you want me to?" He laughed quietly without humor. "That's not a fair question." "Why?" "Because if I answer honestly, I become an even worse person." The silence after that felt heavy. Dangerous. Then he reached over and touched my hand gently. And just like every other time, logic disappeared the second he touched me. I hated how easily he affected me. We ended up in his apartment that night. Not because we planned to. Because neither of us wanted to let go. Afterward, we laid there quietly while the city lights reflected across the ceiling. "You ever think about leaving him?" Ethan asked suddenly. I turned toward him immediately. "What?" "You heard me. That's insane." "Is it?" "Yes." But even while saying it, my voice sounded uncertain. Ethan noticed too. "You thought about it." "No." You hesitated. I sat up instantly, pulling the blanket tighter around myself. This was never supposed to become whatever this is. He looked at me carefully. "You know what the problem is?" "What?" "You stopped cheating emotionally weeks ago." That sentence made my stomach turn. Because again, he was right. This wasn't just excitement anymore. Somewhere along the line, feelings got involved. Real ones. And that's exactly when affairs stop being temporary mistakes. And start becoming life-destroying disasters. The next few weeks felt like living two separate lives. In one life, I was Daniel's wife. I grocery shopped, cooked dinner, sat beside him during movies while pretending everything was normal. In the other life, I belonged to stolen moments. Secret apartments. Late-night calls. Messages deleted seconds after reading them. And somehow, the second life started feeling more real than the first. That terrified me. Ethan and I stopped pretending this was casual. The flirting evolved into long conversations about impossible futures neither of us should have been discussing. "What would you do if you weren't married?" he asked one night. I laughed softly. "Probably sleep more." "I'm serious." "So am I." But he kept staring at me. And eventually I answered honestly. "I think I would have chosen differently." He didn't ask what that meant. Maybe because he already knew. Meanwhile, Daniel grew quieter. Not colder. Not meaner. Just defeated. Like he sensed something slipping away but didn't know how to stop it. One evening, I walked into the bedroom and caught him staring at an old photo of us from years earlier. We looked ridiculously happy in it. Young. Sunburned. Holding each other on some beach vacation we could barely afford back then. Daniel smiled faintly when he noticed me. "Remember this trip?" "Yeah. You wouldn't stop talking the entire drive." I forced a smile. "You hated that." "No," he said quietly. Then after a pause, "I think I stopped appreciating things when they became permanent." That sentence hit me harder than any accusation could have. Because for the first time in months, I saw him clearly again. Not as the emotionally distant husband I resented. Just a flawed person who got comfortable. Who assumed love would maintain itself automatically. And suddenly everything became more complicated. Because Daniel wasn't evil. Neglectful sometimes. Disconnected maybe, but not cruel, which made what I was doing feel uglier than ever. That night, after he fell asleep, I went into the bathroom and cried silently for almost 20 minutes. Then I still texted Ethan afterward. That contradiction destroyed me internally. A few days later, everything escalated again. I was in the shower when I heard Daniel pick up my phone from the bedroom. My entire body went cold instantly. Then his voice. "Why does Ethan text you so much?" My heart stopped. I shut the water off immediately and grabbed a towel with shaking hands. When I walked out, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed holding my phone loosely. His expression wasn't angry. That would have been easier. He looked hurt. "Show me," he said quietly. I forced myself to stay calm. "It's nothing." "Then show me." "It's private." Daniel stared at me for several seconds, then nodded slowly like something inside him finally clicked into place. "That bad, huh?" "No. Don't lie to me right now." The room suddenly felt too small to breathe in. I could still save this maybe. Deny everything. Blame emotional confusion. Say Ethan was just a friend. But before I could speak, Daniel asked the question I dreaded most. "Did you sleep with him?" Silence. That was my answer. I watched the realization spread across his face in real time. People imagine dramatic reactions in moments like this. Screaming. Throwing things. Rage. But honestly, his silence was worse. Way worse. Daniel looked down at the phone in his hands and whispered, "Wow." That single word shattered me more than yelling would have. "I'm sorry," I said immediately. He laughed once. Not angry. Broken. "You're sorry after how long exactly?" I couldn't answer. "How long?" "A few months." Daniel closed his eyes. I saw tears forming instantly, and suddenly I wanted to disappear from existence entirely. Because no matter how unhappy I'd been, no matter how emotionally neglected I felt, I had just destroyed someone who genuinely loved me. Daniel handed the phone back slowly before standing up. "I knew it," he said quietly. "What?" "I knew someday you'd stop loving me." "That's not. But I never thought you'd do this instead of just leaving." He walked toward the bedroom door. I grabbed his arm instinctively. "Please don't go." Daniel looked down at my hand holding him, then softly said the sentence that still haunts me. "I don't even know who you are anymore. I don't even know who you are anymore." Then he pulled his arm away and left the apartment. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the entire place like something permanent snapping in half. I stood there frozen in nothing but a towel, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. This was the moment I imagined so many times. The exposure. The collapse. The consequences. But fantasy never includes the look on someone's face when you destroy them. Daniel's expression stayed burned into my mind all night. Not anger. Disappointment. Pain. I sat on the bedroom floor until almost sunrise staring at my phone while Ethan kept texting. "What happened? Are you okay? Talk to me." Eventually I answered. "He knows." The typing bubble appeared instantly. Then, "I'm coming over." "No. I'm not leaving you alone right now. You shouldn't be here." But 20 minutes later, there was already knocking at the door. When I opened it, Ethan looked genuinely worried. And somehow that made me cry harder. He pulled me into his arms immediately while I completely fell apart against his chest. "I ruined everything," I whispered. Ethan didn't answer right away. Because there wasn't really anything he could say. The truth was obvious now. I hadn't accidentally crossed a line. I made hundreds of conscious choices leading here. Every text. Every lie. Every meeting. Piece by piece, I destroyed my own marriage while convincing myself I was emotionally trapped. Ethan stayed with me most of the morning while I spiraled between guilt, panic, and numbness. Then around 9 a.m., Daniel finally texted. "I'm at my brother's place." I stared at the message. Brother's place. My stomach dropped instantly. Daniel's brother was Ryan. Not the fake office Ryan from years ago. His actual older brother. The same brother who never liked me much to begin with. I suddenly imagined Daniel sitting there telling him everything. Every detail. Every betrayal. "What?" Ethan asked carefully. I handed him the phone silently. His face tightened immediately. "Oh, yeah. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Ethan quietly said, "This is going to get ugly." And he was right. By that evening, Daniel still hadn't come home. He ignored every call, every text, every apology. Finally, late at night, he answered one message. I wrote, "Please just talk to me." His reply came minutes later. What exactly is there to talk about? I stared at the screen with tears running down my face. Then another message appeared. Did you love him? That question hurt because I didn't fully know the answer. What Ethan and I had started from loneliness and excitement. But somewhere in the chaos, real feelings appeared. And if I admitted that, it would completely destroy whatever tiny hope remained. So I lied again. No. Daniel didn't answer for a long time. Then finally. That almost makes it worse. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I went to work looking like a ghost. Every sound made me anxious. Every notification made my chest tighten. Then, during lunch break, I got another message from Daniel. I'm coming by tonight to get some clothes. Not home. Not our apartment. Just clothes. I spent the entire day dreading it. When he finally arrived that evening, the atmosphere felt unbearable. Daniel looked exhausted. Eyes red. Face hollow. He avoided looking directly at me while grabbing things from the bedroom. Can we please talk? I asked quietly. What do you want me to say? I made a mistake. Daniel stopped folding clothes and laughed bitterly. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. I looked down immediately. This was a relationship. That word hit hard. Because he was right again. It wasn't just cheating anymore. It had become something ongoing. Something emotional. Something real. Daniel zipped his bag aggressively before finally looking at me properly. Was he worth it? I opened my mouth. And couldn't answer. Not because Ethan was worth destroying my marriage over, but because I genuinely didn't know anymore what I was trying to save in the first place. Daniel saw my hesitation instantly, and the expression on his face after that looked like the exact moment a person fully gives up. And the expression on his face after that looked like the exact moment a person fully gives up. Daniel nodded slowly to himself, like my silence confirmed everything he feared. Then he picked up his bag and walked toward the front door. Panic hit me instantly. Please don't leave like this. He stopped without turning around. How else should I leave? I don't know, just not like strangers. Daniel finally looked back at me. You stopped being my wife a long time ago. That sentence crushed whatever composure I had left. Because deep down I knew he believed it. And maybe part of me did too. After he left, the apartment felt unbearable. Every room reminded me of what I'd ruined. The couch where we watched movies together. The kitchen where Ethan kissed me for the first time. The bedroom where Daniel found out everything. It all felt contaminated now. That night, Ethan came over again despite me telling him not to. You shouldn't keep being alone right now, he said quietly. I almost laughed at the irony. The man involved in destroying my marriage was now comforting me through the destruction of my marriage. At some point, Ethan sat beside me on the floor while I stared blankly at the TV. You regret it, he said softly. I regret hurting him. That's not the same thing. I turned toward him slowly. What's that supposed to mean? Ethan held eye contact for a second before answering. It means part of you still wanted this. I hated that he understood me so well. Because he was right. That was the ugliest truth in all of this. I regretted the damage. The pain. The lies. But the feelings themselves? Those were real. And admitting that made me feel horrible. A few days later, Daniel finally agreed to meet me for coffee. Not to reconcile. Just to talk. The tension when I sat across from him felt almost unbearable. He looked different somehow. Older. Like the last week aged him several years. You look tired, I said carefully. Daniel smiled faintly without humor. Yeah, funny how that happens. I looked down immediately. For a while neither of us spoke. Then finally he asked, why him? There's no good answer to a question like that. Because no explanation sounds acceptable once betrayal becomes real. Still, I tried. He listened to me. Daniel nodded slowly. And I didn't. It wasn't just that. What then? I struggled to explain it. How loneliness inside a relationship feels worse than loneliness by yourself. How being noticed again after years of emotional routine becomes intoxicating. How resentment quietly grows until someone else walks in and gives you exactly what you've been missing. But every explanation sounded selfish out loud. Daniel rubbed his eyes tiredly. You know what hurts most? What? I would have fixed things if you told me you were unhappy. That sentence nearly broke me again. Because maybe he would have. Maybe we both got too comfortable assuming love could survive neglect forever. I was scared, I admitted quietly. Of what? That it was already too late. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. Then softly said, So instead you proved it. I couldn't even argue. The conversation lasted almost 2 hours. No screaming. No dramatic scenes. Honestly, that made it sadder. It felt less like a marriage ending and more like two exhausted people autopsying something that died slowly over time. Before leaving, Daniel asked one final question. Are you still seeing him? Silence. Again. And again, silence answered for me. Daniel closed his eyes briefly and nodded to himself. Then he stood up. I think that tells me everything. I grabbed his hand before he could walk away. Daniel. He looked down at our hands quietly. Then said, I loved you enough to forgive almost anything. A pause. But not while you still want someone else. And with that, he gently pulled away and walked out of the cafe. I watched him disappear through the window while realizing something terrifying. For months I thought getting caught would force clarity. That once the secret exploded, I'd suddenly know exactly who I wanted and what future I truly cared about. But standing there alone afterward, I had never felt more confused in my entire life. The weeks after that conversation blurred together strangely. Daniel officially moved out. The apartment became quieter, colder. At first, Ethan practically lived there with me, cooking dinner together, sleeping beside me, watching movies on the couch like we were some normal couple instead of the aftermath of a disaster. And for a little while, I convinced myself maybe this was what I wanted all along. Maybe Daniel and I were simply over long before the cheating started. Maybe Ethan was proof I still deserved passion and connection. Maybe everything happened for a reason. People tell themselves comforting lies when reality becomes too painful. The problem was, reality eventually catches up. One evening about a month later, Ethan and I were lying in bed when he casually asked, So what happens now? What do you mean? With us? The question should have made me happy. Instead, anxiety tightened in my chest immediately. Because for the first time, this wasn't fantasy anymore. No more sneaking around. No more forbidden excitement. No more adrenaline. Now it was real life. And suddenly I started noticing things I ignored before. How impatient Ethan could be. How quickly conversations turned cold during disagreements. How easily he avoided emotional vulnerability unless things stayed exciting. Affairs survive on intensity. Real relationships survive on stability. Those are not the same thing. What? Ethan asked after noticing my expression. Nothing. You hesitated again. I'm just tired. But he kept watching me carefully. Then finally, You're thinking about him. I didn't answer. Because yes, sometimes I was. Not because I suddenly stopped caring about Ethan, but because once the chaos disappeared, I finally had space to process what I'd actually lost. Daniel knew me better than anyone. He saw every version of me. The broke version. The insecure version. The ambitious version. He stayed through years of ordinary life. And I threw that away during a period where I felt emotionally empty and impulsive. That realization became harder to ignore every day. A week later, I saw Daniel unexpectedly for the first time since the cafe. I was grocery shopping when I spotted him near the frozen food section. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he gave me a small polite nod. Polite. Like strangers. That hurt more than anger ever did. You look okay, I said awkwardly. So do you. Silence. Then I noticed another woman standing a few feet away looking at cereal boxes. She smiled lightly at Daniel. My stomach dropped immediately. Not because they touched. Not because anything happened. Because he smiled back. And suddenly I realized life was continuing without me. Daniel noticed where I was looking. She's just a coworker, he said calmly. The fact he clarified it so quickly somehow hurt even worse. Like he already expected me to assume betrayal now. Like trust between us had been permanently poisoned. I nodded slowly. Right. Another awkward silence followed. Then Daniel quietly asked, "How's Ethan?" That question caught me off guard completely. Why would you ask that? He shrugged faintly. You chose him. I assume he makes you happy. I opened my mouth and couldn't answer fast enough. Daniel noticed instantly. Again. He always noticed eventually. The woman nearby called his name softly, and he looked over before turning back to me one final time. Then he said something that still keeps me awake at night sometimes. I hope whatever you were searching for was worth losing everything else. After he walked away, I stood frozen in the grocery store trying not to cry in public. Because for the first time since this all started, I wasn't sure Ethan and I actually had a future at all. I wasn't sure Ethan and I actually had a future at all. That realization sat in my chest for weeks like a stone. The excitement was gone now. No more sneaking around. No more racing heartbeat every time my phone buzzed. No more dangerous thrill of doing something forbidden. Just consequences. Real ones. Ethan noticed the shift immediately. You've been distant lately, he said one night while we cleaned up after dinner. I'm fine. You always say that when you're not. I kept washing dishes without answering. Then quietly. Do you ever think about how all this started? Ethan leaned against the counter. All the time. And? He hesitated. That maybe we confused being lonely with being meant for each other. That sentence hurt because it matched the fear growing inside me perfectly. For a long time, Ethan represented escape, attention, passion. But once my marriage actually collapsed, the fantasy changed into ordinary reality. And reality is much harder to survive on chemistry alone. A few days later, Ethan and I had our first real fight. Not about cheating. Not about Daniel. About something stupid. Laundry. Plans. Tone of voice. Normal relationship problems. But suddenly there was no adrenaline hiding the cracks anymore. No secrecy making everything feel intense and special. Just two flawed people standing in a kitchen realizing they built something on top of destruction. At one point Ethan rubbed his face tiredly and muttered, "Sometimes I feel like you're still grieving your marriage." I looked at him immediately. Because I am. Silence. Then I quietly added, "That doesn't mean I didn't care about you." I know. But his expression changed after that conversation. More guarded. Less certain. And honestly, so was mine. About 2 months later, Daniel officially filed for divorce. I remember staring at the papers on the kitchen table for nearly an hour before signing them. No dramatic breakdown. No screaming. Just emptiness. Because despite everything that happened, I never truly imagined the finality of it until that moment. Years together reduced to signatures. Afterward, I drove around the city alone for almost 3 hours, thinking about every small decision that led here. How easy it all seemed in the beginning. How harmless the attention felt. How I convinced myself emotional neglect justified emotional betrayal. But betrayal doesn't stay emotional for long. It spreads, consumes, changes people, including me. That night, I sat on the balcony while rain fell softly across the parking lot below. Ethan came outside quietly and sat beside me. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then finally he asked, "Do you regret meeting me?" I thought about the question honestly. And that's what made answering so difficult. Because the truthful answer wasn't simple. "I regret who I became," I said softly. Ethan looked down. "I never wanted to ruin your life." "I know. But if I'm honest," he paused, "I'd probably still do it all again." That should have comforted me. Instead, it scared me. Because for the first time, I understood something clearly. Affairs survive by living inside emotional fantasy. In fantasy, someone rescues you, sees you, makes you feel alive again. But eventually fantasy expires. And then you're left standing in the ruins of very real lives wondering whether temporary passion was worth permanent damage. A week later, Ethan and I ended things quietly. No explosion. No cheating revenge. No dramatic goodbye. Just exhaustion. Too much guilt. Too much history. Too many broken pieces underneath the relationship. The last thing he said before leaving my apartment for the final time was almost ironic. He smiled sadly and whispered, "It was very nice while it lasted." And somehow that hurt more than everything else combined. Because in the end, that was the truth. It was nice, exciting, passionate, intoxicating. But some things can feel wonderful in the moment and still destroy everything around them.